wish more people knew about women veterans?
I wish more people knew that there were women veterans.
Yes.
I think often when people associate the military, they just think of men, and they forget that women have been serving in the United States Armed Forces, whether legally or not, since the American Revolution, and have made, I keep saying significant, but they have been impactful and have made strides to hopefully get to a place where women are treated as equal in the military.
I was approached as well by the coach there for at the time the coach for basketball and softball was the same coach, and so I was kind of recruited. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm kind of short, but basketball, softball, but I was recruited into play sports there. So so that got me into it, being interested in it, and then learning more about West Point and really what it's all about and the opportunities. I got really interested in it, so that's what got me into and interested in West Point and the Army.
What type of training or schooling did you receive during your time?
Lots of training, always training, especially since I never went to combat. But I mean, at West Point, of course, all of the academic stuff that you do, and then physical things that you do, and then military that you do, history, of course, as well. But also, on the military side, of course, learning about the branches, learning about all of the the equipment and such. And then when I got into, aviation is the branch that I went. So I flew helicopters. It was a utility helicopter. It's way back when, so it was called the UH-1 or Utility Helicopter 1. Literally, it's the helicopters that were flown in Vietnam.
Wow.
Super reliable helicopters. So learned a lot about the helicopter and how to fly that. So there's technical things, but I think first and foremost it's about leadership. That's what you learn about leadership. You learn about teamwork. You learn about communication, how to work with each other. Those are the most important things that today I still think about. And pull through in my life today.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And what was the best part, and what did you enjoy the most?
Flying a helicopter is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I gotta say. You mentioned the Vietnam era helicopter. I actually, when I was in the National Guard, I led the folks that were Vietnam pilots. They were older gentlemen. Yeah. But they were still in National Guard, still serving our country, and they were amazing to learn from because they knew everything about the helicopter that you could ever know. They pushed that helicopter to the limits. I was so just humbled by these gentlemen. And then I thought like at they were so just amazing. I thought I could never teach these guys anything as young lieutenant, and they're here. They have so much experience, and one of the best things was that I learned from them about the helicopter, and then I actually felt really great that I was able to teach them some things, because they were going through things in their lives that I could just talk to them, and I could see what was going on, and how could I support, or the Army support, what resources do we have to support them. And that reciprocal relationship was so meaningful, and really, really one of the best parts of my time in the military. Yeah, so after basic training, for me, basic training was aviation officer basic, and I had a couple different little trainings in between. I had some, I did airborne training, so that means I got to jump out of aircraft with a parachute on my back and do, like, they call it a 5-jump, but you jump out of an aircraft and you have a parachute, so I get to do that. Wow. And then I get to do air assault, which is you actually jump out of a helicopter and you rappel down off of a helicopter, so I get to do those.
Very cool. And what other roles did you have during your service? So where did you serve? What locations?
Yeah, so the next 2 roles were both platoon leaders. One was there again at Fort Polk, Louisiana, platoon leader. And then the other one was platoon leader at my National Guard unit in San Antonio, Texas. And that's where I was leading those folks that were mostly Vietnam experienced pilots.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was the hardest part of the military lifestyle for you to adapt to as a woman? What were some of the biggest challenges you faced as a woman in the military, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so, I think as a woman, the military's changed over time. Again, my time is a long time ago. Yeah. Double the time of your lifetime, Addison. There weren't as many women in the military at that time.
Yeah.
So the fewer, that means you stand out more, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, at the time, you can't see it now, but I had red hair. So it was very, I stood out there. And then I also, since I was in aviation, I wore a flight suit. Mm-hmm. So here I am in a flight suit with red hair. I stood out like crazy. So that thing for me was that's hard. You have to adapt. Yeah, people are looking at you like, whoa, who is it? What's going on here? Why is she in a flight? Sometimes you could, you might pass for something else if you're, some other kind of uniform. But no, this is she must be a pilot.
Yeah.
Really? Wait, what? So you're that was hard. Always just having to. Yes, I'm a pilot. Yes, I fly the Huey is what the UH-1 is called, the Huey. So that's kind of hard. Always yes, this is me.
And then, can you share a specific moment or experience that stands out to you as particularly impactful or memorable during your service?
Yeah, I mean maybe just I'll do 2. Maybe I'll do one good. One not so good. It's one of the things, there's probably a lot of goods, but maybe just one of the goods is whenever I got an opportunity as a platoon leader to promote one of the enlisted folks, especially from enlisted to non-commissioned officer, so moving them up the ranks, and that they went as they enlisted, that I think is so respectable for me, that they enlist in the military, in the Army. They're going to serve their country. They're going to put their life on the line, and they go up the enlisted ranks, and they stick it out and they demonstrate their leadership, and they make it to the non-commissioned officer level. So to really promote them to that level is super special. And that's one of the great parts for me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the not so good parts, that was in the active army. In the National Guard, had an opportunity to do a pretty cool exercise where we, I was in Texas, but we married with another unit, and I was aviation. We married with an infantry unit, and we went over to New Mexico to do more of a reconnaissance for folks who were bringing in drugs. And then we would, be stationed there in New Mexico together as a joint, aviation and infantry unit. Again, kind of very common. I was the only woman, especially infantry, but also aviation. That mix is not very good for at that time, and the infantry guys were like, the infantry at that time there were never any women, so they never had like an opportunity to be with a woman when they were quote unquote on a mission or in an exercise or anything. So to be with them, they thought, great, I have this opportunity, and they thought they could treat me like some other women that they could treat anybody else, and tried to come into my room and do all sorts of things, and it was a constant hassle, and that was not a good experience. Not a good experience at all.
And thank you for sharing all of your experiences, insights, and guidance, and it's truly been an honor and privilege to speak with you today.
So initially I wanted to join because my dad was in, but
Yes.
but I wanted my kids to have roots. So that was keeping me going into corporate America. But when 9/11 happened, I think that changed everything for everybody. I mean, I knew when President Bush gave his speech, I think that is the day that everybody knew where they were that day. I mean, you can ask anybody, where were you on that day? And so I remember my husband coming home, and I said, how would you feel if I joined the military? Because I think you're going to need some help. And he looked right at me and he goes, well, I think that's a good thing, because he was getting deployed and he couldn't tell me where he was going.
Oh, wow.
So I was leaving too.
Wow.
So we both left at the same time. And so he went to a secure location, in a deployed location. And I was off to commissioned officer training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. I will say when I went to commissioned officer training, it was learning how to build a team of teams and actually doing the obstacle course.
Wow.
And it's the trust that you have to build on each other, because these are a bunch of strangers that you're working together with. But after you see that, look, and that's a true statement, leave no one behind. That's truly what it is. It's, if you see someone in the water, it's, you go back up and you get that person out of the water.
Wow.
No one's leaving until we get that last person. So it's trust, really.
Yeah. And what other roles did you have during your service? And where did you serve? What locations?
All right, so I have had 13 assignments, 13
Whoa.
different locations.
Whoa.
And so I've been to Davis-Monthan twice in Arizona.
Okay.
Pope Air Force Base, they call that No Hope Pope, but you know what? I had hope and I did very well there. So I absolutely loved it. Then I went to Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado Springs.
Wow.
And so that was amazing. Then transitioned over to the same location in Colorado Springs to the 10th Medical Group there around the Air Force Academy. And I will tell you, taking care of the cadets was awesome, because just to get to see what they get to do, and these are the best of the best. These people get an awesome education. They come in there for 4 years. So taking care of them was just phenomenal. And then I went to Langley Air Force Base, Virginia.
Very nice.
And that's when I worked for Air Combat Command there as a medical readiness planner. So that was great, because I got to oversee 13 different bases, understanding what planning is when you go to, you know, a war. You have to medically prepare with the pilots to make sure you work with the maintenance team, the mission support group.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. Gosh, I've been a protocol officer for the wing commander. That was great because I got to learn how everything works when you have DVs that come on the base. And I got to work with the FBI and talking with President
Whoa.
Bush.
Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was my favorite because working the red carpet and ensuring security on the base. And then I've done 2 commands, and then my last assignment was at the Defense Health Agency in DC. So one was a in-residence commander at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, and the next one was a deployed commander. And that was at Southeast Asia.
Oh, wow.
So can't say location, it's still secure, but that was amazing. And so, and then my last assignment working at DHA, I got to be your lead for the Department of Defense COVID-19 vaccine as
So
your medical
cool.
readiness planner. So
Oh my gosh.
that was awesome.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so I've had a fun-filled career. It goes by quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow, it's a lot. And then, can you share like a specific moment or experience that stands out to you as particularly impactful or memorable during your service?
I would say taking care of my airmen when I was a deployed group commander. I mean, there was a lot of times where we had packages coming in and some of them didn't even get, you know, presents. So it's like working with the USO, getting packages that are coming in, the Wounded Warrior program, and saying, hey, how can we get things here to make them feel better? And my door was always open, and I truly meant that. It was transparency is key. That's my motto. That's what I was as a commander. And so they knew no matter what, you could come knock on my door, even if it was 2 a.m. and say, hey, can I have a chat with you? And you know,
great.
so I mean, to me, making a difference and building your succession plan as you roll out, because you know one day you're gonna, they call it falling off the cliff, that as you transition over to whatever you want to do next after you leave the military, you got to build those next senior leaders.
Yeah.
So to me, it was building the camaraderie. High morale was always important to me. And lastly, I will say, I always wanted their dreams to come true. And I mean that when I say that, yes. It's like, what do you want to do next? And if someone ever told them no, I'm like, well, let's find out the why behind the no and let's just get you there. So, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. Can you talk a bit about your decision to return to civilian life?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a good story. So my husband served 22 years, and my son, I had my daughter first, and she had already left the coop about 8 years back, and my son was, he was just tired of seeing me come and go a lot. And so I put the decision in his hands, really. My last assignment, being as the lead for the Department of Defense COVID-19, I worked with Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, you know, building up this relationship and partnership with them. I got to know Johnson & Johnson very well, so they told me about the Experienced Military Veteran Leadership Program. And you're thinking, you know, I'm not a West Point grad, I'm not, you know, even though I have a doctorate and I was a 2 below the zone colonel, you don't think it's ever going to be you, you know. And so I just said, you know what? I went home, I talked to my son and my husband, and they said, let's just go for it. So when they gave me the call and said that I got it after a very rigorous program of interviews, I couldn't believe it. I was like, pinch me. I'm like, am I being punked? Seriously, I didn't, you know. So, and my son, just to see the happiness on his face, to say, so you can get out and you can spend more time with me, Mom. And that's what made my decision. It was like, yeah, so that's exactly why I got out.
As a woman being deployed, how did you overcome being one of the 19 out of 2,500 women veterans and being there for a year? Was that lonely for you? How did you overcome that?
So that's a great question. I will tell you initially, what I say, my motto is transparency is key.
Yes.
I had to hide a little bit that I was a little sad because there wasn't a lot of women on the base, because I was a full board colonel, and you had squadron commanders. We had 2 that were female, and the others, you know, you can't really hang out with them much of the lower ranking. So, so it was keeping myself busy and telling yourself, listen, you were selected for a reason. You were that, there were line commanders that wanted you to come here. So my schedule was, I'm not kidding, I'd get up at 3 a.m., I'd call my family for an hour, and then I'd hit the gym from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Wow.
And then I'd show up at the clinic there at 7 a.m. And then I'd work until about 6 or 7 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And then I'd always check on my airmen. I wanted to make sure that they were okay, and I knew that they were always at the community center, you know, either playing pool or doing something like that. And then I'd look at my chief. My chief is what saved me, because my chief master sergeant was like, hey, are you good, Colonel? Is there anything you need? And I'm like, that's my question to ask you. And he was like, no. So we were a team. So one, make sure you're a team. But the women on the base, we actually got together at least once a week to say, hey, how are you guys doing? Is there anything we could, So I think that first month was hard because we didn't know we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
And how did we counteract with one another? But after we got to know one another, that was the support structure. So I would say for women, get out there, get to know your other colleagues. And if not, just go out there and see how you can help support. But do activities to really, get your mind off things at home.
sure.
But then now you have the ability to call home all the time. So
That's nice.
yeah, so that's nice. And I was
Yeah.
able to talk to my husband and son every night. So speaking of my son,
Yes.
so just like you, how you're doing your gold award, and I'm very proud of you. So my son, he's 14 years old, Adam Garrison, and he came in because his dad was a Eagle Scout. And so at a very young age, he did Cub Scouts, and then he just completed his Eagle Scout project. And so, and I hope I don't cry, because he came over to me and his dad and said, I would like to dedicate a project to supporting veterans. So he went over to the Washington Crossing National Cemetery and said, what do you have that I could build for you? And so they said, why don't you build a flag retirement box, because we have folks that have, when they get deceased, we need a place to retire those flags. So he did that. It is so beautiful. It's red, white, and blue. And then they have guardians there that actually go out and help, salute with the veterans and the families. And so he built them both 2 benches of their request. And so it took him a couple of days. The planning process was very long and very thorough.
I'm sure.
But he got approved from his Scoutmaster, so I'm so excited. And he's only 14 years old, so I'm so thrilled to have him and supporting the vets along the way. So, and he always says that they'll always hold a special place in his heart because his parents served. So, yeah.
What's one of your most vivid memories of your time in training or in school as a woman?
I think the physical training was very challenging. Like they put you on very high obstacles. They're over water, so you're not going to die. You shouldn't, but it's scary. You're up a few stories, and there's no net. It's just water under you, and you have to move across different obstacles. And so I have a fear of heights, and so I think the hardest thing for me was those days where we had to do training like that, because I was hesitant. And sometimes when you're in a stressful situation, male or female, you may cry. And that's not necessarily a sign of, it's a stress. But the military, especially the Army, doesn't love that. So there were many times where I remember, I do have a vivid memory of being on an obstacle that was very high, and I wasn't moving, and I was very scared, and I had some tears leaking out of my eyes. And this sergeant was screaming at me, and he was screaming, "You're just a scared little girl. You're just a scared little girl. Get off my obstacle. Get off." And you, like, I wanted to move and get off his obstacle, but it's those, you really feel belittled, because now you feel like it's your gender that is holding you back. And I don't think it is. I think it was a fear of heights that was holding me back. But you have to, you got that in the military, and you have to develop a thick skin, and you have to move past it. But I think that those were the hardest moments in training.
So after training, what was your first assignment?
After I finished my training in Alabama, I was sent over to Germany to a unit which was already deployed. So I was going to be a platoon leader, but my platoon had already deployed into Bosnia-Herzegovina 7 months earlier. So I was what you call a replacement troop. So the lieutenant who was already in charge was coming out because she was moving on to, I think it was another female. She was leaving for advanced training, and I was coming in as a second lieutenant. So I arrive on the ground in Germany, and the first thing they tell me to do is I have to do 10 days of language training of Germany, which I thought was so ridiculous because I was about to head to Bosnia and I didn't need to learn German to go to Bosnia. But the Army has its rules and the Army works a certain way, and so they went over their checklist and they said, nope, the first thing you do is 10 days of language and in-country awareness. So I spent a few days learning German. I qualified on all my weapons systems. And then I went up to Frankfurt, Germany, and they put me on a train down to Bosnia, and actually to Slovenski Brod, Croatia, where I was then given, so that was the staging area before you actually cross the Sava River into Bosnia. So I'm in Slovenski Brod, Croatia, and that's where I received live ammunition. And that was where we went, and so they drove me, that's where I was picked up in Humvees. And they drove us right to the Sava River. And I remember seeing across the Sava River, and in the distance, I could see smoke, and I could see that like buildings were damaged from the war. And it was really the first time it hit me that it was like dangerous. And I know intellectually, throughout all my trainings, I knew intellectually that it was war, there was a war zone, it was a conflict. But it's not until you're actually there and you can actually smell the smoke, see the choppy water, see the pontoon bridge that the U.S. Army had used to cross over into Bosnia was still floating, was still there. And I just remember being scared for the first time because all up until then I felt very, like I had good training and I was ready and I was like gung-ho, and I remember being like, I can do this. And then all of a sudden the fear hits you. You actually see that you could get hurt. You see the damage. You see that this is real. And then they handed me as the 23-year-old female. And I was with a bunch of men who were also replacement troops, but they were all enlisted. And they handed me the live ammo. And they were like, you're the highest ranking, so you're gonna get the live ammo. If something happens on the trip down to where you guys are gonna get, sent in to Bosnia, it's about a 2-hour drive. You'll have the live ammo and you can disperse it. And I remember thinking, am I really the best qualified? Like, honestly, I'm 23 years old. I know I just did some training, but these guys look like they've had way more training than me. But no, you're it. And that's how the Army works. And so that was another big moment where you're like, you take a deep breath and you think, okay, I am trained, I can do this. It's terrifying, but here we go. And I remember taking the ammo and loading up my and I had quite a lot of ammunition and a lot of guns. I was carrying a 9mm, I was carrying an M16, I had an M203 grenade launcher. I had a shocking amount of ammunition for a 23-year-old who was headed in, but that's what the Military Police Corps required, and off we went. So I served in Bosnia for a few months, and then I came back to Germany and finished out my tour. So my tour was in Germany for 4 years.
What was the hardest part of the military lifestyle for you to adapt to as a woman, especially head of the military police? I think we started touching this before.
I think so. When I think about the hardest moment is really when I arrived in Bosnia as a replacement troop. So because my soldiers had already, first of all, my soldiers were majority men. I think I had 1 or 2 females in my unit, the rest were men. So you're talking like 28 seasoned men. They'd already been there 7 months. So everyone had 7 months of like, conflict experience, I think it was, when we were in Bosnia. So they were hardened to what they had already seen. There was already deaths that had happened with the landmines were a big thing in Bosnia. And so they had seen a lot, and then there I was, really green and a woman and young, and I show up and they had no respect for me. There was a lot of what I would call hazing that happened. So I'll just share one story with you, which is the very first night I was there, we had night patrol. So shifts were 12 hours long. So you went from 8 to 8. So we were on the night shift from 8 p.m. until 8 a.m. And I knew from my training that I needed night vision goggles before we were going to secure the perimeter. But my soldiers were like, that's just in training. You don't need your night vision goggles. So they told me not to bring them. And I knew in my gut that that was wrong, but I wanted to show that I was listening and hearing from them. And so I put them on my cot and I did not bring my night vision goggles. We get out to the perimeter and it's a 5-mile walk around Tuzla Air Base, which is the perimeter that we secured. And it's pitch black. And we are walking the line. There's 2 levels of concertina wire where the Americans are. We have machine gun nests, concertina wire, trip flares, and then another set of concertina wire, and then there's the exterior. We're walking this perimeter, and when you come to the trip flares, you need to step over them. I don't have my night vision goggles, so I'm tripping the trip wires. So every time I'm not only am I falling, my weapon, my M16 is falling into the mud, I'm also sending up a flare, and the US machine gun nests are now aiming their weapons at me, and I have to know the challenge and password or I'm going to get killed. So this was their idea of fun. This was their idea of welcoming the new female lieutenant to the unit. 5 miles. It was a nightmare. It was the longest 5 miles of my life. It took a few hours because of all the falling and I couldn't see. And when we got back, one of the soldiers was like, I guess maybe bring your night vision next time. So that was probably one of the hardest moments. I definitely went back to my tent and cried. But again, these horrible, difficult, milestones change you. You have to pull yourself up and you have to get tougher and you got to take a deep breath and you make it through the bad day and you know that you're going to survive and be stronger, and then the next day you go back and then you realize I need my night vision goggles and I'm not going to necessarily listen, and you get tougher and stronger, but those moments are very tough, very tough. I can tell you though that the Pentagon tried to reduce the sexual harassment. They put out, and this is back in the 90s, so they put out VHS tapes of training that the soldiers had to do. But I can give you an example of how the male leadership handled that. Was the commander of the unit got up in front of all of us. We were all in formation. He held up the 6 VHS tapes in his hands, like so stacked together, pushed, and he was like holding them like this. And he said, we are required to show you these tapes. And he held the tapes up over his head and said, does everyone see the tapes? And everyone said, yes sir, yes sir. And then he smashed them onto the pavement and said, sexual harassment training is complete. Everyone has seen the tapes. And as a woman standing in formation, you're thinking, I guess he's giving permission for sexual harassment to continue, because that's how he handled the training. So that was less than ideal. But to go back to your question, you learn to survive and you learn to get stronger with your female officers. So I'm still friends today. So I'm 51 years old today, and I am still in contact with those women that I served with in 1996.
That's amazing.
So, and that's the kind of bond that you form in the Army.
Anything you would like to add that we haven't covered in this interview? Any other stories or?
I think the one thing I'll add is that the fight continues, in the sense of I'm an Army veteran. And I still today, though, there are still people today that have a hard time with that, like don't necessarily believe that. I'll give you one example, is that I went to my son's school twice now for Veterans Day. This is a few years ago when he was in elementary school. So I go to the school and I check in at the front desk and they tell me where to go for his classroom. And as soon as I walk in, the teacher says, thank you for coming. Moms are standing over here. We have the veterans at the front of the room. And this happened 2 years in a row. And I was like, it's so interesting that you would automatically assume that just because I'm a woman, that I'm not a veteran. And I was surprised in, because that happened to me in, 2016, 2017. So not that long ago, and also, can you believe in that time frame that people still have a hard time believing that a woman could possibly be a veteran, even though women have been serving in the military, since World War II.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that was still a thing. People even question if I served, where? What branch? I took my son to a football game in Philadelphia, and I wore a veteran's hat. And someone asked me, well, did you serve? Well, obviously I served. I'm wearing a hat that says veteran. And again, the questions, where did you serve? What branch? Like almost questioning whether or not it was stolen valor. And that is hard. It's hard to take, knowing that I did my 4 years and I served, and that because of my gender, you don't see me, you don't see that. So it's frustrating. I think times are changing, but it is annoying.
My training, so I was commissioned as an aviation officer in the United States Army, which meant that I was going to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and the flight school that was there. And flight school was about 9 months of training. So we had classroom training, then we actually had flight training, and then and there were breaks in between. So I spent a little over almost a year and a half in Alabama getting my flight training. So that was the beginning of my training. But all throughout West Point, we had leadership training, character development, and that set me up for success to be an officer. But that first year and a half, I was in student mode. I was learning how to fly helicopters. And after that, I went into my first platoon and was immediately leading about 30 soldiers. And that was, again, that's when I really felt like I was the only woman, because I was in a battalion with nothing but men. And there was one other woman in the whole battalion, and she was a warrant officer. And I very much felt like the only woman in the whole unit, which is about 300 people.
What is one of your most vivid memories of your time in training or in school as a woman? Do you have any stories or moments that stand out to you?
I think one good story that sort of stands out is when I was at the National Training Center, which is a desert in western part of the United States, Mojave Desert, outside of California. And I was getting the tent set up with everybody else. We were all preparing to set up our field training exercise. And so everybody was laying out their cots, and I realized, I'm going to be the only woman sleeping in this tent. And so I said, well, I'll sleep on the end. And then I realized, where will I go to the restroom? I'm going to have to go out to the porta potty, which is about 50 meters away, in the dark of night. And oh, by the way, I hear coyotes in the background, somewhere out there in the night. And so that female warrant officer gave me a coffee can. Now, I don't even know if you could find these coffee cans anymore, but coffee used to come, maybe it still does, in huge metal cans. And when you're making hundreds of pots of coffee, you need a big coffee can like that. And the coffee can, once empty, what do you do with it? Well, she showed me how to put sand in the bottom of it and use it as a little potty next to my cot, so that I wouldn't have to go out in the night, in the darkness, where men would step right outside the tent and go. I was able to create a little curtain and have my own space in the tent. Gosh. So that was a true moment of sisters, womanhood sticking together, where she taught me that very important trick. It saved many a night of walking out in the darkness. And
oh my goodness, wow. What was the best part? What did you enjoy most about training?
Honestly, the best part about training was learning so much. I mean, I gotta say, it's pretty cool to fly helicopters.
I can imagine.
And I just loved it. It was hard at first. What was hardest was learning the physics of it. How does a helicopter fly? And learning the weather. And how do you think about weather when you're going up in an aircraft? Or how do you know whether you can fly or night? Or what's your visibility? How to figure out your fuel mileage and your fuel management for the length of your flight, where you're going, depending on your altitude. All of that changes. So there was a lot of academics actually that were part of flying. But the flying itself was also tricky at first. But as they say, it's like riding a bike. Once you get it, you got it, and it was super fun. But the best part really of training was being with everybody else, because you're all learning together, you're shoulder to shoulder, you're going through the hard stuff together, you're going through the fun stuff together, and you just form really unique bonds. And that was true through West Point. All the friends that I made during my years at West Point, you make those friends in college, but when you're crawling through mud together, throwing grenades together, sleeping in the dirt together, you, I think, form unique bonds that last a lifetime.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what was the worst or hardest part of training?
The hardest part was, especially as a woman, was, I mean, physical training aside, like I'm not a runner. That was tough. Marching with a 50-pound pack on your back, not super fun. But the hardest part really, because during those difficult physical training times, there was always somebody that was willing to help out, or I'm willing to help out. And again, it's that camaraderie of working together. For me, I had a difficult time, and it's an instance, a quick story, was I was flying with a very experienced pilot, and we had a bunch of infantry troops in the back, and it was a training exercise, and I had an officer in the back get on the microphone to not just who was in the aircraft, but to all of the command, everybody listening on the ground, and he asked me a very personal question, which was, "Hey, Captain Jeffries, how do you pee when you're flying up here?" And it was, I feel like I'm talking about pee a lot.
No, it's all good. It's interesting.
But it was, he was trying to humiliate me. He was trying to embarrass me.
It's awful.
And I just said, "Sir, you have a hot mic," meaning like, "Sir, you think you're talking just to me, but you just blasted that really inappropriate comment to about 100 people listening to this radio frequency." And that shut him down completely. But it was I think the hardest part was when people would underestimate me or any other woman just because we were women.
It's awful.
But then the fun part, the flip side of that, is when you prove them wrong.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember in your pre-interview you were talking about how you never actually like you saw combat as a civilian.
Right.
So can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So it's funny, as I was saying about being at the National Training Center, most of my time active duty in the Army, I was training for come what may. And 2001, 9/11 happened, and we were ready to go to 9/11. And at that time, it was shortly after that, as we prepared and really we were ready to go, I got diagnosed with lupus. And the military just kind of didn't know what to do with that. They were like, "Well, you could stay in the Army, but you won't deploy." And it's kind of like an Olympian training for, to compete in the Olympics.
Yeah.
And you do all that training and then you find out you can't go. And it's not like the war is a competition or a game, but it's something that you committed to and you signed up for and you want to serve. You want to fight for your country. And I didn't want to stay in the Army if I wasn't going to be able to deploy. So I chose to leave. I had the option to stay and not deploy, or I could leave, and so I chose to leave, but took a role as a management consultant with a company that supported the Department of Defense. And in that role, they needed somebody to go to Iraq, and I said, "Please send me. I'm well trained, not that I would be going over there to fly helicopters for a management consulting company, but I just wanted to be in the fight." And so I went to Iraq and I lived in what was called the Green Zone, right outside what became the embassy. When I went it was the end of 2003. It wasn't yet the embassy. Ambassador Bremer wasn't yet the ambassador. He was a special envoy, and I was working in what was called the Information Management Unit. And my job was to go to all the commanders across the country of Iraq and talk to them about this database. We were trying to track all the construction projects happening across Iraq. It was a difficult task because most of them already had their own databases, but it was a tremendous learning for me, and for me it was my opportunity to be with the military again and to be in the fight.
In what ways did your experiences in the military shape your identity as a woman and your perspectives on gender roles and equality?
I think the military made me appreciate the power of a woman.
Yes.
I think, here's another quick story.
Yes.
As a young lieutenant, I was in a training exercise, and as I have mentioned, I was the only female in my unit. And so naturally, the senior leader said, "Hey, LT, make the coffee." And I said, they want me to make coffee. Okay, I'll make coffee. And so I went to the giant coffee maker and I said, "No one really wants just plain coffee. I want cafe mocha." And so I took the cocoa beverage base powder, which is basically a little packet of hot chocolate that comes in your MRE, your meal ready to eat. I tore open a couple of those, put that in the top of the coffee grounds, and I said, "Oh, this will be a great pot of coffee," knowing that all of those men like very strong black coffee. They poured their cups and they said, "Who made this coffee?" And I said, "Oh, you guys don't like cafe mocha?" And they were like, "You're never making coffee again. Get out of here." And I was like, all right, mission accomplished.
Good for you.
So it was just those little things. Sometimes you just have to remind them of, like, you know, you don't have to be confrontational all the time. You don't have to be angry, but to show them, yeah, I'm here for a lot more than making your coffee.
That's great. I love that. I love that. Why did you choose the Citadel?
Growing up in South Carolina at the time, the Citadel, for most of its history, was all male. It wasn't until the mid-90s that women were finally allowed to attend. So for me, that was pretty impactful. The first female graduate graduated in 1999, which is when I was in high school. And so for me, knowing the challenges of being a woman and also going to a school that historically didn't allow women was really important to me.
And what motivated you to join the military, and what were your initial expectations or hopes for your experience as a woman in the armed forces?
I would definitely say for me, joining the military and also going to the Citadel, a big part of that was wanting to be a part of positive change in the world, and truly believing that if you want that change, you have to be a part of that. So for me, that was a very large motivating, significant motivating factor for me. When it came to what I was concerned about or worried about, I think everyone's concerned about what the unknown might be. Especially at that time, I didn't know if I would ever have to go serve overseas or what that might entail, on top of just being in the branch of the armed forces that has the least amount of women. And so that is also its own challenge. Yeah.
And what type of training did you receive during your time?
So over those 6 years, there was many different instances of training. But for the Marine Corps, when women enlist, there's only one place in the United States that women go to train initially, and that's Parris Island, South Carolina. So I did boot camp or basic training in South Carolina at Parris Island, and then after you graduate, you're considered officially a Marine, and then you go on to what they call is MCT, which is Marine Corps Combat Training, which every Marine also has to complete before they go to their schooling. So their occupation schools, or your MOS, your military occupation, sometimes you can choose what it is, sometimes you can't. I entered as a 151, which was an administrative clerk. So then I went on to train in North Carolina for my military combat training and also for administration school.
And what is one of your most vivid memories of your time in training or in school as a woman?
So I definitely think that there's a lot of vivid memories as a woman training. I think, it's a little bit different for Marines than maybe the other branches, because women do train separately during basic training before they go to combat training in their MOS school. So in that environment, especially earlier on, I think it's great because it's women training together, supporting one another. So you have less of the obstacles that you might face if it were to be both men and women training at the same time. When it came to other instances, I mean, there's countless times that being a woman is challenged, especially in a male-dominated field like the military. I think for me, one of the most significant ones was when I went through combat marksmanship training school, which was years later. I was the only woman in my class. Not to say that other women didn't become marksmanship trainers, but the class I went in, I was the only woman. So for me, that was a challenge because you definitely have to prove yourself in that situation. So that, I think, when I think about what it was to be a woman, that would definitely stand out as one of the more challenging times.
What other roles did you have during your service?
So in the Marine Corps, you initially start off as what they call like a basic Marine. And then as you get more training, right, your roles change over time. So early on in my career, I was a Marine, I was an administrative clerk for a logistics company. And then as I got more time and experience, that changed. I was adamant about learning different roles, so I would get my Humvee license or other licenses for other vehicles, just so I knew I could serve my unit best. Or, like I said, going to Marine Corps combat training, combat marksmanship training school later on was another role I took on. As you get promoted through the ranks, with that comes more responsibilities as well. So by the end of my career in the Marine Corps, I was a platoon sergeant for the headquarters platoon within my company, which is really focused on making sure the care and well-being of your platoon is executed and supporting those Marines. So I was doing that on top of my administrative work as well. So it does, over time, your roles change, especially with more, ranks that you were in.
Definitely. Where did you serve? What locations?
So mostly on the East Coast. Again, basic training is Parris Island, which is in South Carolina. After that, I was in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and also Camp Johnson, which is right within Camp Lejeune as well. And then my reserve units, again, were in Charlotte and Charleston, South Carolina. There were other opportunities I had throughout different training cycles through the years to go to other bases to train, overseas to Okinawa, where I was at Camp Kinser. I also was in Africa for a training cycle and support for like a joint task force with not only the Marine Corps but other branches, as well as supporting and helping train the Moroccan military. So the Marine Corps, I traveled to quite a few places within the US and outside as well. There's so many instances, but I would definitely say there are moments where being recognized for your work as a Marine is important. When I was awarded the Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medal for my the work I was doing in Africa at the time, that was an important moment for me. I would also say there were moments where I was first salutes to some Marines I served with who then commissioned as officers, and the fact that they chose me to be their first salute is impactful, because it shows they had that respect for me, that they wanted me to be their first salute. So I mean, It really depends. There's so many instances, but those are the first two I could think of right now.
Yeah, those are awesome. And how do you feel the military has changed in terms of gender dynamics since you first enlisted? And do you believe progress has been made in addressing gender equality issues?
I believe so. There's always work to be done.
Yeah.
When I was in the Marine Corps, women could not be in combat roles, where today they can, which is, it's significant.
Definitely.
I think those are steps in the right direction, especially for jobs that women are more than capable of doing. And I think there are women right now who are proving it, and taking those leaps into these different combat jobs that, again, 20 years ago were not a possibility for women enlisting into the military.
What was your first assignment after basic training?
Oh, okay, so I went to the military school. That would be
Yes.
considered my place of duty. So I was at
Okay.
New Mexico Military Institute from 1994 to 1996.
Got it.
It's a junior military school, so picture like a mini version of West Point. All right, and that's what it is. I mean, we wear uniforms. In fact, the area inside in the quarters are kind of similar. I think West Point is like a big box in a courtyard area where everybody forms up. You know, they have like a military marching band. They have their own football team.
Yep.
You know, but you go to school and you do your physical training. So that's part of the regimen. You go to school, you study. You know, there's a mess. You go eat with everybody. It's very structured. You stay in the military school. You know, there's no option for you to live off post with your family or anything. You're there 24/7. And if you're in, not everybody that goes to this school is in the ROTC program. So if you're part of it, then you have to do these exercises, these field training exercises where you take your tents and you go set them up on the ground. And I was in New Mexico, so you would set them up and you would have these exercises in the cold and freeze your. So we had additional, requirements for ROTC because not only are you in a program that's supposed to shape you to be a future leader, but you're doing it like less than 2 years versus the 4 years that everybody gets. Right. Yeah, so it's a little bit accelerated and aggressive. It's an aggressive schedule.
Wow.
Yeah.
What other roles do you have during your service? Where did you serve? What locations?
Oh, okay. So after New Mexico Military Institute, I went and did my the signal basic course that I said at Fort Gordon, and then once I finished that, I went to Korea. That was my first assignment.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a 12-month assignment, but I extended myself 18 another 6 months to make 18, so I can come back for the career course. Normally, what the normal path is, you go to the basic course, you do like a 3-year assignment. Eventually, you come back and do your captain's course. But because when I commissioned, my time and grade continued, I showed up to Korea with nothing on there's a thing called an officer records brief, and they're like, well, what did you do for the last 3 years? Well, I was in school, because after military school, let me back up. I had to go finish my degree, so I went to Georgetown. I forgot that step.
No worries.
Sorry. I had to finish my degree because you can't go active duty until you have a 4-year degree. But some of my credits didn't transfer, so I spent 3 years at Georgetown to complete my degree. I went to the School of Foreign Service, and then I went to the basic course, and then I went to Korea. So then when I showed up and they're like, what did you do for 3 years? Well, I was at Georgetown. I didn't do any. Those are those 3 years you're supposed to be a lieutenant. So they put me in these really tough positions a little bit at a time so I could get a little bit of everything. So in 18 months, I did like 3 things, I was the S4, which is the logistics person for the unit. So I did a little bit of that for the unit. I planned like their food and all that when they would go to exercises. And then I became a platoon leader, which is what you want to do as a lieutenant. That's kind of like the path, right? So I did that, and then they put me in the battalion S3, which is operations or plans, where you plan the operations for the exercises or if you deploy for the deployment or whatever. Here I go back to Fort Drum, and by the way, it's very cold there. So I go back to Fort Drum and I do everything all over again, because what do they do in mobilization? They're getting everybody ready that they're basically weekend warriors, right? That's what they call the National Guard. They only go one weekend a month, right? So now they have to make them like a professional training force. They have to go do weapons qualifications. They got to go to the NBC chamber and do the gas mask thing, right? So they have to do all those. The unit and then you're doing preparation to actually do your deployment to Iraq. So while you're doing all your basic soldiering, redoing all those skills, you're also planning for combat operations. Like we were actively planning with the unit that we were going to replace over there. I got out, but I got a job in the National Guard. That it was a federal job, but it was an accepted position. Most of the federal jobs are competitive, which means there was some restrictions to it. So in my case, I had to come to work in a uniform. I had to drill with the unit. So I was supporting the National Guard in uniform as a government employee. So I was basically in the National Guard. So I would say I was in this position for 9 months.
What advice would you give to other women considering joining the military based on your own experiences?
My advice that I would give to women, or that I would want them to know, is that if I can do it, they can.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of women that I served with. In a deployment, it's a little different in a mobilization, because you're mobilizing people with families, right? And women have, I don't want to say a bigger family role if they have children, but there's a bigger, I think, burden on them. So my commander, for example, was a single mom with 2 little kids, right? Who was, I don't remember what her civilian job was, but when she was a weekend warrior, she was the signal commander for our battalion. And she had to leave her 2 kids with her mother when she deployed. So what I'm saying is, like, women like herself still, you know, served her country even with, you know, these types of situations. You know, she made it happen. So I didn't have that. I didn't have kids. I didn't have any of that. I was single, you know. But what I'm saying is there are examples of women that have gone into combat and have left, you know, our moms, right, have left their children behind to serve their country. So if they can do it, if I can do it, any woman can do it. You just want to do it, you know. You want to have that sense of civic duty to serve your country.
Where were you born?
I was born in Annapolis, Maryland. My dad worked for the federal government, which brought my parents there, and I was born there, which is ironic because that's where the U.S. Naval Academy is, and so my mom used to push me in my stroller around the Naval Academy, though I did not go to the Naval Academy, but you know, there was maybe some, you know, initial seeds of, you know, joining the military there as a child, going to the Naval Academy.
And what were your initial expectations or hopes for your experience as a woman in the armed forces, and especially the Navy?
So even, you know, from my initial training, you know, in college, going through ROTC, it was very apparent that, you know, women were the minority. You know, there was much fewer than us, especially as school went on. people would drop out for various reasons from ROTC. And so when we finally graduated, I think that there was maybe 4 women. We started out with 10 freshman year and ended up with 4 when we graduated. So you definitely knew that you were going to be in the minority and maybe, the only woman a lot of times. I was fortunate enough on my first ship to have an integrated crew. Back when I joined the Navy in 2001, there were still ships that didn't have women on them. So I had female officers and enlisted on my ship, so it was nice to have that camaraderie on the ship instead of being that first person, that first woman, kind of trying to break down those barriers of having an all-male crew.
And in total, how long did you serve in the military?
So I did 7 years on active duty as a surface warfare officer, and at that point I decided to transition into the Navy Reserve, and I have done 16 years in the Navy Reserve. I'm continuing to serve, so I have a total of 23 years with hopefully an intention to do 30 years and retire at 30 years of service.
What type of training did you receive during your time?
So after I finished college and graduated and was commissioned as an officer through ROTC, I went off to, I came actually up to Newport for what's called the Division Officer course, which is the initial course for all surface warfare officers. So it was 6 months back then, and I learned all of the basics about ships and about being a surface warfare officer, what the capabilities of your ship is, how to do navigation, seamanship, and ship handling. And then my follow-on school was down in Virginia. I was the strike officer, which is responsible for the Tomahawk missiles and that weapon system, as well as the 5-inch gun weapon system, and then CWIS, which is one of the other weapon systems on board the ship. So I went and learned all the basics about that before I reported to my first ship.
What was your first assignment after you were commissioned?
So like I said, I was trained to be a strike officer. So my first ship was the USS Leyte Gulf, CG-55, which is actually being decommissioned next month. I reported aboard in December in 2001. I actually was flown out to Bahrain and met the ship in Bahrain, which was a little scary because it was right after September 11th.
Oh, wow.
And so you're, flying to a foreign country in the Middle East. So it was quite a nerve-wracking experience. I had my friend Kate Meadows. She was reporting to the ship the same time as me, so we were kind of in it together. But it was definitely, just a very eye-opening, nerve-wracking experience as a 22-year-old, trying to figure things out.
And what other roles did you have during your service? Where did you serve? What locations?
Sure. So I did both of my division officer tours down in Norfolk, Virginia. So like I said, the Leyte Gulf was my first tour, and then my second tour, I went from being the strike officer to being a TLAM planner. So I would plan the routes that the TLAM missiles would go on. So that was at what's called a float planning cell Atlantic, which doesn't exist anymore. But I deployed on the Truman and did a deployment with them over to the Middle East, which was another really cool experience. And then I came up to Newport actually to do instructor duty at the Surface Warfare Officers School. And after that tour, that's when I transitioned into the reserves. And I spent most of my time in the reserves in 7th Fleet, which is stationed or based out of Japan. So I've sort of bounced through different units within that what we call area of responsibility, the AOR. And currently I am the commanding officer of U.S. Forces Japan. So again, going back to Japan, but going to Yokota Air Base. A lot of trips to Korea and Japan in my reserve career.
Wow. And can you share a specific moment or experience that stands out to you as particularly memorable or impactful during your service?
Sure. So I was thinking about this question when you sent it to me, and I was like, I have like two things, like a happy and a sad one. So we'll start out with the sad one, get that over with. But so talking about Chief Busterski. So on my first ship, we had come back from deployment, and my dad was supposed to go in for surgery, and so deployment, when a ship comes back, there's this big, welcome, there's people on the pier with signs and balloons, and all the families and friends are there. And I knew that my family wasn't going to be there because my dad was going in for surgery, but my friend who was on a ship a couple piers over was supposed to come and meet me and drive me back home, but he wasn't there. So I was like, oh geez, I guess I'll just walk over to his ship. And it turns out that he was on duty, so I had to go over to his ship, find him, and he had to tell me that my dad wasn't doing well, the surgery, was not good, and I needed to get home as soon as possible. So so that was tough, being sort of like a young 22-year-old where other friends of yours haven't had a parent like pass away, or kind of don't really know how to react to things. So thankfully Chief and my division were very supportive, like when I got back, and but it was it was just a hard time, because you feel very isolated on the ship when you're disconnected from your family and things like that. So that was, impactful, and I feel like it's kind of like set me, sorry, I don't want to cry, but it's kind of like set me on like my path, because, this is what my dad wanted me to do. Oh, sorry.
No worries at all.
But that's on a happy note. So like one of the best feelings is like seeing people succeed. And so I don't know if I mentioned, but I work for the Navy as a civilian too. And so I have enlisted sailors that work for me, and NC1, which is a career counselor, so NC1 Wagner. So NC1 Wagner could not get promoted to, he wasn't getting selected for advancement to Chief Petty Officer. He was thinking about retiring, not, he just wasn't making the cut. And it can be very difficult at different, times in your career. Like if the Navy doesn't need career counselors, you're not going to get promoted. So we found out that he had finally got selected for chief, and being able to tell him that he was selected, and that he was going to be able to continue on in his career, and making chief is a really big deal on the enlisted side. So being able to see him get promoted, and then I was able to re-enlist him, so that means that he was going to continue on in the Navy. You have to sign another contract. On the enlisted side, you have to sign a contract to stay in the Navy. So he re-enlisted and went on and did another tour, and that was it's such a good feeling to see when you have sailors that are doing well and succeeding.
And what has inspired you to stay with the Navy for such an impressive amount of time?
Well, I think camaraderie, is one of those things, is just, having great friends and meeting people. I think a lot of it too is being able to travel and see the world and have different experiences and meet people in different places. So I recently was over in Korea, and being able to talk to the enlisted sailors that were working as our translators there was really interesting. Their experience in the Navy is very different than ours. So just having that understanding of other cultures and how other countries operate is very eye-opening.
And in total, how long did you serve in the military?
21 and a half years.
Wow, that's amazing. And what type of training did you receive during your time?
That's a really long question to answer, because my career went through a couple of major changes. I would say that in the beginning, it was a lot of hands-on training, kind of Coast Guard basic sorts of training, right? And then once you get into your specific mission and field, then you're going for all those things too. So I went to boot camp, basic training, Cape May, New Jersey, and graduated after a very cold few months down there. And then from my first unit, you get to choose. The Coast Guard's a little bit different in the way that they do things. Everybody who goes through basic training is assigned to a unit after that before you go to your Class A school. The other services send you to Class A school and then you're assigned. So it gives you a little bit of a chance to see, what different people do in the service before you make a commitment. And I was stationed at Governor's Island, New York, and at a unit called Ferry Boat Maintenance, which was not very exciting, and decided that I had to, get out of there to go to A school kind of quickly because it was not my jam. But so I went to Quartermaster A school, which in the Coast Guard is shipboard operations and navigation, not the Army type quartermaster, which is more of like a supply chain. So I graduated from A school and then was assigned to a buoy tender and learned a lot of on-the-job stuff. But then you also go through all these different trainings for other mission-related things. So search and rescue, law enforcement. If you are aside, like the buoy tenders, we had these very specific missions, so there were schools that were directly related to that as well, Class C schools. So I had a lot of different training.
What is one of your most vivid memories of your time in training or in school as a woman in the Coast Guard?
Vivid memories in training. So when I was stationed at Point Judith here, I went to heavy weather school. It's for operating the motor lifeboats in rough conditions.
Wow.
And that training is in Cape Disappointment at Cape Fear, sorry, not the Cape River, Cape Disappointment just near the border of Washington and Oregon. And we were underway doing some surf training because it was a beautiful day for surf training. And the person who was at the helm had a little bit of a panic attack when we were approaching this wave, and actually didn't apply enough momentum to get us over the top of it, so we ended up rolling. We were sent breaching to the wave and actually rolled the boat.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a vivid memory.
I'm sure.
That's kind of exciting. That's not related to being a woman in the service.
Yeah.
However, I would say that the reason that I was in that position to go to that training was because I was performing a job that a lot of women didn't necessarily do at the time, which was, and there's way more. I mean, it's great that there are so many women there in the service now that are really doing a whole lot of, fantastic things.
Yeah.
But at the time, there were a few of us who were doing that kind of job. So it was cool just to be able to be there and to do it.
What other roles did you have during your service? Where did you serve? What locations?
So I primarily served on the East Coast. I started, like I said, in New York. I went from New York to North Carolina for the buoy tender, and that job was cool because we went from Cape Fear River all the way up to Washington, D.C. at the Potomac, and had all of the offshore in Chesapeake Bay, which was really neat. And then I went to Woods Hole and was one of the first women serving on patrol boats in the history of the Coast Guard. Actually, it was me and my XO were the first two women to be stationed on patrol boats. Again, kind of remarkable. That was not that long ago.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool, and we did we serviced all around New England and did a lot of fisheries patrols and things like that. And then from there, I went to the 1st District Command Center where I was a search and rescue coordinator. So that job was kind of unique because it's like a peek behind the curtain. You know, you get to see the major operations of the whole district and what the district is going through. And during that time, I will just mention that that in the middle of that tour was September 11th. And that piece of that moment in time was really changing for the entire service. It changed the way that we did business 100% and added a whole new layer of new jobs and new priorities for the Coast Guard. It changed us. After that, it moved us from Department of Transportation. They created the Department of Homeland Security, and they put the Coast Guard under that umbrella too. So it added all these missions. It changed our structure. It really changed the way the communications within the Coast Guard worked, because New York was part of the 1st District, which is where I was working at that command center. And when I say that it was a peek behind the curtain, it really was looking at the future of things in a really like micro kind of climate. So it was a cool place to be, and also like a really eye-opening experience in lots of ways too.
And what did you pursue after?
So after a lot of soul searching, I got back to my roots and decided that I wanted to go to boat building school. So that brought us here to Newport, Rhode Island. I've been a lifelong woodworker. And I needed 2 things. I needed to transition from military life to civilian life, and I thought that going to school would be a good way to do that because it's very neutral. It's not like getting into another job where I, have to leave my chief hat behind. And also I really wanted to hone my skills and take some time and see what it was that, I wanted to do after that. So I went to the International Yacht Restoration School, IRIS, here in Newport. It's a 2-year boat building program.
It's amazing.
And it was a lot of fun.